So, watching a lot of videos online, a lot of games analysis videos, a lot of games criticism videos. You know how it goes. And one consistent problem that I found across, let's say, the vast majority of all the videos is that they always overscope. And the second most prevalent problem is that they fail to compare like things to like things whenever they're making a comparison. So I was thinking, like, why do all these critics, why do all these writers and gamers and people overscope so easily, right? Like, if the percentage weren't so high, maybe I wouldn't be asking this question. But it seems to be something that is so common that it's worth bringing up. So I tossed the question to the group. I said, "Hey, group, that's you guys. What's up, group?"
What's up?
Hello.
Hey. So I said, "Hey, group, what's up? Why do you think people overscope so much? Why do you think they overscope in general?" That's the question. And feel free to respond to this question. We'll see what you have to say.
Um,
Or
it's
maybe you ask, what is overscoping? I don't know. You tell me.
oh well, I okay. What is overscoping then?
Quit stealing my questions. Overscoping is essentially trying to bite off more than you can chew. And it's really all dependent on two things. One, how much time you're going to give to saying whatever you have to say. Your typical YouTube video is about 10 minutes. Your typical articles are around 800 to 1,500 words. Maybe design articles reach closer to 2,000, 2,500. But in that allotted space, time and space is limited. So you have to pick your examples wisely. You have to only ideally argue what you can support. And what we found is that most people by default will, instead of zooming into a small detail or a small issue and articulating that across the time that they're given, they will go to the largest scope and scale possible, and then they'll try to work their way down in a completely sort of foolhardy effort to try to go, this is the entire Zelda series. I have 10 minutes. Here we go. You're like, I can't even get past a single mechanic of a single game in 10 minutes, let alone 7 games with all that complexity, right? So I was just wondering, why do you think people typically will scope so large and say so little in their efforts, given the time and the amount of research that they give to these topics?
When when you play a game, you experience it moment by moment, um, and then over time, as you complete the game, the experience is meshed together, and you form opinions. And what sticks with you isn't necessarily what happens in any given moment or how any particular rule of gameplay works, but instead it's the judgments that you form as a collection of gameplay moments and the impact that they had on you.
It's important, Greg, that you don't steal my answers. After we've talked about this yesterday, you have to give the new guy the chance to,
Oh,
to say something less intelligent.
Greg, you dirty cheater!
We might edit that one out. You just put it right at the end. Um, anybody else supposed to posit a guess, if you will,
Oh,
why
well, I had
people
like,
overscope?
well, I had a few. One is that it's kind of laziness. Like writing's hard work, so you kind of get tired and you don't want to, you know, have to go in and explain things and find examples, especially with what you're doing with when it's across like 7 games. So,
Mm.
kind of just I want to get to the point, but man, I don't want to go all these steps to actually get there. I just want to take the elevator. So that's kind of what happens.
The elevator is
Um,
notorious for stealing steps from human beings.
yeah, and then they don't get their exercise and they
Yep.
wonder why am I getting tired when all I do is stand all day and count things.
And then we're all stuck in the Wally future where we're blobs on hover bikes.
Yeah. So laziness is one. I think another is that people simply don't have an eye for details. Like most media we consume, and partly from, I would say, poor education, we don't really look at details like that. We don't know how to take specific moments and extract like themes and things like that out of them.
Mm.
So sometimes just getting someone to, give you an example of something, they can stumble on something as simple as that.
Yeah, it's too much for them. Hey man, I love that movie. Oh, cool. What was one of the characters? Hey man, I didn't ask for this analysis. I just wanted
Yeah,
to tell you I love the movie. Well, okay.
yeah, it's kind of like that. And that's also one of the reasons why it's hard for people to, like, I don't know, break things down and put them into, how should I say this? Why it's kind of why you have the like to like problem a lot, because they don't know how to break down those things and categorize them properly to actually make proper comparisons.
Okay, Adrian, it's important that you don't cheat too. You're not supposed to give good answers at the top of the inquiry, but
What?
maybe Derek will save us.
Oh
Derek,
gosh.
please.
All right.
We want you to set the bar low.
How flattering.
It's my time to shine, or rather, spit. I guess.
Yeah,
No, you're Wario. It's your time to fart.
Yeah.
it's WAP time.
Okay. Your so the question was, why do people overscope?
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically when people simplify things to not talk about the details, right?
Yeah, and they bite off more than they can chew, based on the arguments they try to uh, convey in this short period of time.
I guess it's just hard for normal people to take things under a microscope like that. They just look at uh, the blackboard and want to make the connections there.
Hmm. Cool. I like metaphors. I'm gonna go with that. Okay, so it's an interesting question, and it's a question that for a discussion like this can easily turn into why do other people suck? Yeah, why not? Why? Like, well, that's not exactly what I'm asking, because if you just take a little moment to think about it, in any particular domain, like you may be very comfortable with video games and talking about video games, but just like shift the domain to something else, and you'll find that you have very similar, if not the identical, shortcomings and habits that other people have outside of your particular domain of focus. So this is not about why other people stink at writing about games. This is just in general, why do people overscope? What is the nature of experiencing things, thinking things, and then articulating those experiences and thoughts? And what can we find out about that? What can we say? So this is a little game I propose. I'm going to type out something in the chat, and hopefully everyone here can play it except for Greg, because he's cheating already. Right here, I got a list of thingies. I want you to separate these lists of thingies into groups. It's classic separate these lists of thingies into groups game. You ready?
Ready.
Boom. Typed it in. Okay. Take a
Okay.
moment and separate them into groups by typing it, and then we'll hit enter whenever you're ready to submit. Point of the exercise is that a little theory that I've been running with. We'll see how it pans out. But essentially, another friend of ours, I gave him the same test, and he just said, "I don't know. They're all fruits," which is the
Well,
the best possible answer he could give. So essentially, it's saying
he's not wrong.
here's the list. The list is almonds, peanuts, cashews, chestnuts, cacao, soy nuts, pecans or pecans, pistachio, and walnuts. Right? It's a list
Mhm.
of what many people would consider to be nuts, but in fact, if you are persnickety Food Network viewer or just some kind of know-it-all, you know that
Mhm.
this list is actually composed of three different types of items, one being nuts, one being drupes, and one being legumes.
Shit, that's what they're
No
called.
way.
Legumes grow underground. Nuts are seeds that grow on trees. And I believe drupes are classified as the inner seed when the outside fleshy fruit is either dried or whatever, right? So there's a difference between those three groups. Um, in that, let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Drupes are pecans, walnuts, and almonds. And if you've never seen a real live almond unshelled, they're kind of freaky. Long
Yeah.
cylinders with little holes in it that you're not supposed to eat. Let's see. Let's see. Legumes. I think the nuts are cacao, cashew, and something else. I think pistachios are
Peanuts are
oh,
legumes.
legumes, right?
I can
Yeah.
eat legumes, but I'm allergic to the other two.
Are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah. Well, I'm not deathly, but yeah, I am
Yeah, yeah.
allergic.
So that's an interesting point, right? You give a list. Some people like I don't know. It's all one big group. Other people go, oh, shelled versus unshelled, um, edible items. Which depending on how you encounter these items in your store, you may find that some are actually shelled and some are actually unshelled when they sell it to you. So that's kind of like a different thing. The other is, oh, they have these scientific classifications, which nobody cares about, right? Nobody cares if you're like, actually, you're eating a droop sucker. You're eating a droop holiday mix, not a nut mix. And get out. If you said that, you'd be like me, and things wouldn't be going very well after that. But essentially, the groups of things based on things you've heard, but mostly based on personal experience. And that is a way that when it becomes relevant to you, and people that are allergic to nuts know the difference between the categories nuts and droops and legumes because one kills them and the others don't. And sometimes when you have an allergy like this against nuts, you go, screw it. All things that people call nuts, I don't care for, right? But it turns out you can have a very specific allergy to just nuts and not droops, just droops and not nuts. So, if you really want to diversify your protein intake, you would know the difference and know what will kill you and what won't. So, in that way, the categories become very important and relevant to you. So, my theory is the reason that people initially overscope so poorly, it's kind of related to both what Adrian and Greg said earlier. It's like you don't even you experience things moment to moment. But another way of thinking about that, especially when you're playing a game, you're experiencing the total macro experience, all the sounds, all the buttons, all the things. And even though you're only playing one specific part of a level at once, it's like super sensory overload, right? And you got a lot to focus on. In a given level, all those challenges, enemies, mechanics, all those secrets, all those pickups, power-ups, anything, you got a lot to focus on. So you're automatically exposed to the game in these huge, overwhelming slices of experiences. But then after that, your ability to both get through that experience as a player and your ability to remember what happens afterwards depends on what's relevant to you, right? Everybody kind of remembers that enemy that pisses them off and that was put in that one spot. Adrian, insert story about Ninja Gaiden Bird.
Yeah. I think
Right.
there's. Oh yeah, it's on 6-2. There's this one that
Yep.
comes over a bunch of crates. That's really stupid
Yep.
because you're already halfway up the screen, so it comes out and you barely have any time to react for it, and it's over the pit too.
People remember cheap enemies because you could say there's a lot of repetition in overcoming them, but not all the time cheap enemies are about because you died a lot, but sometimes it's just like the relevancy of you trying to beat a game and it getting in your way in a cheap way is gives it an extra little spark in your memory, so people remember stuff that's relevant to them. And you remembered a lot about that scenario. You remembered the enemy, the placement, and the level name. Like that's a lot, right? So I don't think there's any particular problem in the way that the potential for people to remember things works. It's just a matter of what is relevant to them and why, right? So people will remember categories. They'll remember subdivisions. They'll remember groups of things when it becomes relevant to them. But half of that is what they think is possible. So you can play a whole game and not really learn any of the enemy names and kind of in an RPG grind your way up to a victory and kind of not even understand the systems at play. But for most people who want to play games well, they actually have to know the difference between their punches and their kicks, their spells and their attacks, and all the different particulars that a video game offers. So we're naturally learning categories all the time. The real question is, based on what you remember, what does that say about what's important to you and how what your outlook is when you're playing these games or having these experiences. And I think people, like Adrian said, don't it's a little bit of laziness, right? But it's a little bit of just not being aware of what's going on. And they go hand in hand. Like, there's more to it, but you just don't think it's important. And you don't think it's important either because you think what you're doing is good enough, how you play is good enough. Maybe you think you can't do any better. Maybe you think it's a waste of time to learn things when you already can beat the game well enough by trying a whole bunch of times, like so on and so forth, right? Which very much mirrors uh, people's individual learning proclivities and learning styles, right? Some people will go through a class in school and they'll only memorize for the test. They'll only care about what the teacher is saying when they tell you to highlight the important parts in the book, and then they'll tune out everywhere else. Other people go into a class and they'll be fully immersed in the subject. They'll spend time out of class wondering about things. They'll read extra passages in the book. They'll look up stuff online because they're genuinely interested in the subject. And then that zeal, that passion, that extra effort, it allows them to remember things better, which gives them the ability to recognize different groups, items, and objects, which creates a more detailed and structured framework, which allows information to stick better, which in turn allows them to do better on a test, especially when teachers like to switch things up and actually test for more things than the explicit things they tell you to highlight, right? So there's just a very big difference between those two experiences, and it extends to just about everything in life. You can go through either with low expectations or aiming to do the least, or you can just be inspired and put your energy into things regardless of its direct application to what you perceive to be the only measure of success, right? So we come all the way back to games criticism. And to go back to the nut example, did I already say? Yeah, I already said which ones were which, right? I'm probably wrong,
Yeah,
but it doesn't matter because I can eat all of them.
yeah.
I can eat all the nuts, but it's funny because peanuts are not nuts, and I think soy nuts are nuts. Wait, soy nuts are not nuts. They're little beans and they're legumes, right? So peanuts
Right.
and soy nuts, though called nuts, are not technically nuts by this category. Cacaos, I think they are nuts. Cacao pods, but I thought they were beans, but they don't grow on the ground. They grow on trees, so I think they're nuts. So on and so forth, right? And the more you try to use your intuition to sort that list out, you'll realize that there are a lot of peculiarities, a lot of inconsistencies and idiosyncrasies, right? People slap the word nuts on things that aren't nuts. But then you're like, then some people say, what does it matter? They're all nuts. And you're like, well, if you're dying because of an allergy, then it matters. And then even beyond that, flavor. They're all flavored differently. And they may all cook up the same, but maybe they don't. Like maybe some have a higher oil content, which means they burn faster when you try to toast them. Who knows, right? There's a whole world of details out there that you may be interested in if you either wanted to cook or eat these things or stay alive if you have a food allergy. But that kind of brings us back to the core topic, right? People overscope because they don't recognize the categories, because they don't have a more complex framework for experiencing these very complex experiences that are video games, because they either aren't curious or they refuse to sort of embrace digging deeper into these things when it is completely not necessary, and necessary being what is required to scrape by with the minimum possible to beat any level, right? So in a world of infinite coins and no arcade machines, we kind of have this strange reality where people aren't it creates these huge divides between what people say and what they experience and what they're trying to convey, right? Like, I don't know why anybody would want to scrape the skill floor and tell you how cool the game is, right? Like, or how bad the game is or how unskillful when they're just really barely scratching the surface. They're getting like a 55, and in some school districts that's a passing grade, right? But obviously you should aim for the 100. Yeah, I think that's something interesting to think about when you're either trying to talk about games or um, you're watching videos on YouTube or whatever about different video games, right? Everyone in their quest to justify their own feelings, in their quest to articulate what they experience, you know, which everybody wants to articulate things that they experience. Instead of recognizing the scope of the task, instead of doing some research, instead of being curious, they will most likely just they'll most likely do as little work as possible to try to say as big of a statement as possible, which is really the opposite of what they need to do. Instead of comparing one thing in a Zelda and talking about it, they'll pick all 7 Zelda games and tell you almost nothing about any of them.
Yeah, it's being super biased because what you said with curiosity, apparent. I guess for a lot of people, that's not a strong motivator for them. So what happens is, I have this idea, and I'm gonna find things that help that idea when it's not as it's not as curiosity research. I have an idea about this game. I'm gonna go in and see everything to see, and then just see what comes out of it.
Mhm.
Instead, it's more of I have a fixed answer. I'm gonna find things that
Yep.
conveniently fit in that. And we especially saw that because you keep bringing up Zelda with the sequelitis video where that happens a lot, where it's just like I remember the one at the end that definitely stands out to me is when he's talking about Twilight Princess, when he's like, "Oh, you get a double dumbass claw shot. That doesn't change anything." He's like, "Yeah, it does." Like, what are you talking about? And he talks about other items in the games, and well, what do you say? Oh yeah, the spinning drill. Oh, it's like a teleporter, and it's like, no, it's not. You can jump between the rails. You use that to physically travel through the level
Yeah.
that a teleporter does not do. So, that's an example of like ignoring the details because what he wanted to say is, oh, it doesn't change anything. The problem is that because you didn't take a look at the facts of what the details are, and in some ways it's just because he's not able to see how that actually plays a part in the dungeon's design and how you move through them, that he couldn't read it. So in his mind it's like it doesn't change anything, but it may be that he just doesn't have that uh knowledge
Lens.
there to help him. Yeah, that lens there to help him with that.
Yeah, I think exactly what you said is the reason why people fail to compare, to make good comparisons, right? People want to compare games all the time, telling you one's better than the other or one sucks or whatever. But the very act of making a comparison requires understanding parts, understanding these subdivisions, right? Understanding categories. And if you didn't have the categories to start, then like you said, you'll just probably pick things that you like and pick some other things that you dislike and say, look, they're not the same, which is the very premise of a comparison. You're comparing unlike things. You don't compare the same thing to itself. That's not a comparison, right? So like if your argument stops with look, they're not the same, then you really haven't done any work at all.
Yeah, it's also that it's also just because comparisons is an easy thing to do. I think it's something that we naturally do, and it's a way that we kind of make sense of reality is by comparing and contrasting things.
Mm.
The problem is that we just don't always do that well all the time. So like say you're buying computers, you say this one has this and this one has this and this one costs less. It's like, yeah, but that's because you missed out all these other features on this one. This one, the reason that one's cheaper is because it's on Windows 7, not on Windows 8. So, and so that's why you didn't, that's why your comparison was faulty.
I think that's the core of why people they don't make like to like comparisons. You have no hope of making a good, like if I told you in that group to compare those elements like to like, right? Droops to droops, whatever. And you had no idea about those categories. You'd just be guessing, right? You wouldn't have any hope of. You'd have a small chance of landing on the right one. But then, what would you say afterwards if you don't even know what the groups are or the reason why they're grouped in the first place? You weren't if you don't know the details or the particulars on why they're grouped that way. Then what are you gonna say after you even land on a lucky right one?
Right. Oh yeah,
But the
that. Oh, you go, Greg.
but the payoff is that if you ignore the details, then you get to say more general statements that have a larger scope, and so I think it's inherently more interesting to be able to say things that cover a wider range of topics, and sometimes people do that at the expense of being accurate.
So you think it's inherently more interesting to say a bunch of general things than it is to say specific things?
Yeah, like it's enticing to say that uh, a generalization just on the face of it, to me personally at least, has more appeal because it's, I don't know, it's more I don't know, it just
It
is.
has the air of being smart and being researched. When people do real research and study thousands and thousands of cases, and they come up with only data that supports so much, they'll come out and say, turns out that eating fruits can generally cause this because it's such a complex uh, situation they're looking at, and the research can only say so much. So I think, you know, if you do all that research and that's all you can say about it, then say it with pride, right? You did all this hard work, and it's going to lead into something more important down the line because good research breeds good research, right? But I think a lot of people, with the way they consume media and talk in the news, think that just because you make a general statement, you also like rise to that level of competency. Like, oh, these games have been getting worse over the years. Like, whoa, did this guy study all these games? Like, let's listen to what he has to say. And the more general you are, I think it appeals to people who also don't have any more detailed level of specificity in their experience base, right? This is kind of what I was saying before. Like, if you say something general to somebody who knows more than you, somebody who knows the specifics, you sound like an idiot. Like, oh yeah, none of the Zelda games let you wear anything other than green. You're like, you're dumb. Link to the Past, you're dumb. Wind Waker, you're dumb. Twilight Princess, you're dumb. Skyward Sword, you're dumb. And you're like, come on, like four swords, and you just off the top of your head go like, that's not gonna fly. Like, I have very specific details in my mind that instantly come up. So even though, and if you talk to someone who doesn't know the Zelda games, they're like, "Oh, interesting. I didn't know that." You're like, "Well, great." And that's kind of the situation you get into. General statements. See, I think one of the illusions is if you can make a very specific statement that isn't widely applicable, and it sounds like a general statement, right? You can talk about common things that happen in Zelda games, but not every Zelda game. So the only thing you can say is many Zelda games feature a a strong characters in the bar that give Link advice every now and then. You're like, oh, interesting. But you're like, how many Zeldas can that possibly be? Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, maybe another one. Like, sure, that may be a common thing to say, but you can't there's like a much bigger picture there, a much more detailed picture. And depending on who you're talking to and who your audience is, you could either lead them astray or you could lead them closer to observing more of these details and getting a more detailed picture, right? I've had that conversation a lot with people. They say a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of different things. And you're like, everything you said was like wrong, right? Like, even without being an expert on the thing, there's all these questions that come up. Like, you opened up more cans than you could handle, cans of worms, and you couldn't close them. And then there's some of the responses are like, "Oh, I was trying to be general." Like, who ever told anyone that being general and wrong is better than being specific and right? Right? Specific and accurate. I don't know who started. This is like the whole like look more intelligent, sound more intelligent than you are, and don't inform your audience. Just make them feel like you know what you're talking about. Like, who cares about any of that? It's supposed to be helping them understand something, conveying important information, not leading them down a path of destruction.
Yeah, I was going to say that another thing could be that people watching just don't have an eye for, or an ear, I should say, for listening and knowing when something iffy is being said. Um, that was something I definitely learned in eighth grade.
Hmm.
So it's to a level where I know when someone's making a crappy point without knowing what they're talking about, and that's just because it goes back to logical form
Hmm.
and the different types of reasoning. It's like, okay, if I can track down what you're saying, then the only thing, and it makes what is considered a structurally valid argument, A goes to B, B goes to C, therefore A goes to C, then the only other thing left is verifying whether or not those uh, premises are true or not.
Yeah.
And you know, that's kind of all you need to do. But I don't think anyone knows that at all. Like, like not even my parents. Like the concept of validity, like that's not even the thing they know. So it's something like people intuitively understand. Like that's how we all talk, and it's kind of even baked in sentence structure that
Hmm.
of how to make an argument, but they just don't know like the formal sort of criteria for it. That's what they don't know, and that's why people, not only are they not good at speaking, they're not good at listening.
Yeah. I think speaking even to what Greg was saying, oh, people love generalities. Like, do they? If you walked up to someone and be like, "Oh man, just got back from Japan," and they'd be like, "Oh man, how was it?" Like, "It was generally pretty good." And then you walk away like, "Come on, like, does nobody think?
Yeah.
Does anybody think that's a satisfying answer? You want details. How long was the flight? What was the flight like? Did you sleep on the flight? How many movies did you watch when you landed? How did you get through the airport? Did you have to buy that Shinkansen pass? Did you do this? How was it? Native people, I heard this. Like, come on, details. Everyone cares about details. Like, and what Greg was saying, you experience certain things moment to moment. Uh, and another way of looking at it is you're getting you're experiencing everything via details, but they're coming and going so fast that it builds up these moments that you can hardly reflect on as you go along. No one can reflect on things as you go along, by the way. So, we're used to living in a world with details. So I don't know why we're convinced ourselves that when we reflect on things, we should be general. uh, you're supposed to highlight the details. Remember, the details are the things that you liked in the first place. You play video games because every button you hit does something. For every frame, for every moment, for every interaction, it does something that either builds up to something or in the moment to moment, you like these particular moments. So I think a lot of people confuse themselves thinking that the high level thinking, the higher level thoughts, the summaries, the general thoughts are of a different fundamental essence than the moment to moment details. And like it's the opposite. The moment to moment details build up the bigger picture. And it's made up of all those tiny dots, if you will. It's not of a different kind, it's of the same substance. So if you move far away from what's underlying the substance, right, then what are you doing? It's like trying to talk about a painting and do art appreciation, but you don't show the people you're talking to the painting. So like, oh man, I saw this amazing painting. You're like, well, can I see it? Oh no, I'm not gonna. You don't get to see the individual paint strokes. You don't get to see the paint dots. I'm just gonna tell you about it. It was pretty cool. It'd be just like that stupid Japan story I told you. Like, no, you want to get connected back to the source, and the source is the paint on the canvas. Make no mistake. It's not this. It's not the energy of you're retelling me about your adventure, looking at the paint on the canvas. It's not what you think the paint on the canvas symbolizes. That comes after recognizing and highlighting source details.
Brought back a lot of uh, bad memories with art history classes because they love explaining things in a way that is just like they're kind of just making shit up as they go along.
Yeah, I was in a few art classes too. I mean, I've been in many different kinds of classes, and you can tell the students that don't quite get it or don't quite care and how they talk. You're like, I know you're just copying the way you think the right answer sounds, but I obviously can tell you don't know anything.
Well, I was actually referring to the teachers.
The actual professors, ouch.
Yeah, yes, pretty bad
Yeah,
because
I got a lot of A's that way.
yeah,
Well, we
that was
already know
how.
you're a cheater, so
Yeah, and some people say it really is just kind of just bullshitting things about the painting, and then they'll give it to you because a
Yeah.
lot of times the teachers themselves are kind of just making things up and not pointing to anything in the painting about what they say. So they're just telling, oh, it captures the essence of life or whatever, and it's like, shut up, you're not saying anything. And especially my drawing teacher was a real idiot about that, where he would prefer like really sketching poorly drawn paintings because it gives him more feeling, and it's like, that doesn't help me as an artist. Please give me something so I can draw better. Just saying, oh, these lines are sketchy and there's a lot of scratches and it has no sense of form or color or contrast. All the actual things that you can point to in drawing and say, you know, this is where you need to fix, and things like perspective, all things that would actually help me. But no, I get, oh, I don't feel anything. It doesn't speak to me. It's like, ugh.
You know what? One really troubling trend that I noticed when people experience a work of art and then they get an opportunity to discuss it afterwards. Very disturbing trend. So they watch the thing, it's like a movie, or they play a game or whatever, and they get an opportunity to discuss it, maybe with the developer, maybe with someone who's supposed to be an authority. And then the first and only questions they ask are, so what was the history behind making this? Give me some history about the time period. Give me history about the composer. Give me history about the artist. You're like, who cares about the history, right? Like first, you should be asking, let's talk about the film. Like, tell me more about the intro. How does the intro serve up the rest of the film? Tell me more about the ending. What did you think about this weird scene? Like, talk about the thing instead of talking about the fact that a human being alive on this planet at some point sat down and did some work to build this thing. Like, seriously, the historical context only goes so far. You gotta. This reason why they call it context is because you're supposed to contrast it with what you understand about the work itself.
Yeah, that's pretty much what got me the most with abstract paintings and expressionism and all that. It's like it cares more about the history behind the work and not the fact that most of them were of kind of poor or just like not much of anything to say. Like I literally had a guy who just drew squares. That was who I was supposed to do a presentation on. It's like there's nothing to say here. He's got 300 something paintings of just squares. Like the fuck am I supposed to make sense of it? Most of them don't have names. They're just numbers. It's like goddamn. You give me nothing. This one has more blue. What do I say? They're just squares. He is like I forget what his name. It starts with an R, but he's like the quintessential abstract painter, and there's nothing to make of it. The only thing significance of it has is relative to other works of art and its time period, and when artists were going, hey, fuck what our art schools were teaching us about what they think good paintings are. We're gonna make it about nothing.
Is it interesting then that, like, I mean, people still derive feelings out of those paintings even though they don't have much literal meaning to them? Like, someone still looks at a painting that's a bunch of bullshit squares and says, this looks pretty to me.
Sometimes you can get something that's visually interesting. I'm not gonna say that hasn't happened before. I think what Kandinsky or whatever, where he's got just a bunch of
I
shapes
mean,
and lines going around.
my favorite artist, my favorite painter.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
Where and
he's my favorite.
to me that is one example of an abstract painter kind of actually doing what they were setting out to. Is like, what if we took out the symbols and the meaning associated with these images and just made something visually interesting, and kind of getting to the basics of art, which is line, color, tone, and all that. And Kandinsky, I feel, actually did sort of accomplish that, because you have a bunch of lines and shapes that naturally draw your eye around the painting and see what's going on it. And that's one example where that kind of worked. The other guy, which is a bunch of squares, is like a square is a flat object. There's no like line going around. They're just sort of there, and some of them are different colors. It's like whatever.
So do you think that you hit the topic?
Yeah, I think that hits it.
I don't know how much. I guess I should leave this in, but yeah, I ended up ranting about my art history classes.
Maybe there are people that are just they only have that sort of attention span for it too. Because I remember a while ago, maybe this is kind of an extreme example, but somebody was showing off. Hey, here's a 3-hour analysis on all the Naughty Dog games from Uncharted up to Uncharted 4 and Last of Us, and people are like, 3 hours? What? I don't have that kind of time. Like, why would you spend 3 hours on all these games talking
Yeah.
like this? Like, they wanted something more concise and fit into like 10 or 15 minutes. But
Yeah, oftentimes, I think that reaction is, part of the modern day culture of distracted, information overloaded media kids on the internet. So that's like, okay, that's the common ground, which people don't have a lot of stomach for long things that are supposed to be enlightening and educational. But here's the trick. Here's the trick, though. Everyone forgets time when they're entertained. So regardless if it's 3 hours, um, if they start watching it and they're like super entertained and they can only watch 45 minutes, they wouldn't make that complaint, right?
Right.
But then there's this other thing where people love being concise. Sure, you can take a message and play around with the editing in order to say really important things, but just not give it many examples, not use as many words to illustrate it, just be a super laser focus, which is not typical of modern videos. They like to make jokes and like make transitions and stuff and kind of produce it because that's kind of a technique you do when you have less you have to say, you put more filler in, so to speak.
Well,
So to speak. So when you get videos like that, so Eagle Raptor made his Zelda video, right? And his previous videos were around 8 to 10 minutes for Castlevania, and a little bit longer for Mega Man. But then his Zelda video was like 40 minutes, right? So, based on his popularity, people, I don't know if they really complained about the length. He did fill up the video with lots of stuff. When you sit down and watch it, everything just flows. So like you forget about time. And if you put up another video, similar length, people would watch it. If you broke the video up into parts, that would kind of take away a little bit of that sting of 3 hours. And you'd like, oh, this first one's 5 minutes. Let me see what this has to offer. Like, there's a lot to be said about how to present something. But at the end of the day, moment to moment in your video, you can either be focused, concentrated, and well supported, or you can just be blathering general and unsubstantiated.
Yeah. It reminded me of another video, not the Uncharted one because I haven't seen that one. I'd like a link to it though, just to see how that one goes.
All right.
But there was one that we all saw together actually on Mario 64, where that was a really long video. I think it was like 30 minutes, maybe
Was
an
it
hour.
the
I don't
Matthew
remember.
Matosis one?
He does long
Uh,
videos.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was on Mario 64.
I believe it was
And-
mitosis. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, I just don't remember his name because I never saw any other videos after that one. Because that video was long and it's nice to see the effort, but so much of it was just like a shopping list of observations in the game, and
Yeah, he does that.
it's like, analysis.
It's so hard.
critique. Yeah, it is hard, and I appreciate the effort. But the point is, you're supposed to get all those details and make an idea about it, not just say,
Well, so like if you have a podcast, podcasts have really well established as a form where people can just speak their mind and have the natural flow conversation be a thing. You pop it on, you go to work, you're spending an hour traveling to work. It kind of meshes with that entire sort of way of consuming it. But then you do a video podcast, which is essentially what Matosis is doing, just playing and then just talking off the top of his head or whatever, and then just saying a whole bunch of things and observations. It's great for a podcast, meshes less well with a video, but then you're like, well, what's the difference, right? You could just watch this like a podcast. You could pop it in while you're traveling, whatever. But sometimes there just seems to be an odd fit. But I think that's mostly because you don't like what he says, not because of the format. Like you're saying, you can be more concentrated because what you're essentially saying is you're not saying anything meaningful to me. either the stuff you're saying isn't very good, or it's not presented in a way where, based on your experience with Dark Souls or whatever other game he's talking about, that he's making a lot of sense to you. Either way, right? You're saying there's something lacking, and that's primarily what I'm hearing based on your complaint.
yeah, that I would say that too, because if talking about, because I remember there was like almost barely any mention of, because I don't know, if you're going to talk about Mario 64, I kind of like to hear a little bit more than just basic things like, oh, Mario can jump into paintings, so that's Mario using his mechanics to interact with the game. And it's like,
Yeah.
I bet Mario doesn't even talk about the paintings too.
I don't know, it's like things like that. It's just a bit on the obvious side. There was one good point that I liked, which was that oh, in the early levels, there's no bottomless pits. On the middle levels, there's like lava and sand, but they don't instantly kill you. And then in the last levels, there's bottomless pits. So it's like, oh yay, a clear trend of progression with the difficulties of the stages. And I thought, okay, that one was nice.
Well, that's unless you don't go berserk with Mom's Fortress.
Yeah.
Because that is basically a floating island in the middle of nowhere, but you can like just hop over the edge if you
Yeah, you
want.
don't-
But
Oh, I want
Yeah.
to. You know I want to.
So yeah. And sometimes it's just like pointing to things in the games, like,
Oh, you know what another annoying trend is that people like Mitosis do? Hey, let's
What?
talk about this game. Cool. Let's do a deep dive. Awesome. Okay, here's the history of it. What? Mario
Oh.
64 is the first game that allowed you to run into a painting. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't care. Like, that's
Yeah.
not why I'm here. Did you
Yeah.
know that no other game used it? Ah! Like,
Yeah.
say it quickly and move on. And all they're doing
That-
is like history.
That's what I mean by the shopping list of observations, and it's just like, oh, the history of the game, oh, the controls, and oh, I pulled a quote from Miyamoto about saying
Mm-hmm.
about he spent Mario chasing a rabbit or something to make the game feel right, and it's like, yay! I don't know, when I see a 30-minute video like that, I kind of want to see things like a dig into the level design, which was only like one part that ever did that. But
Well,
then it moved on to other stuff like music, which I really don't care.
I think what you would have to do then is wrap that into an analysis, which reads Super Mario 64 as an exploration of chasing rabbits.
Mm.
Yeah.
Down their own holes.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, wait. I guess I never connected the dots. Alice is chasing a rabbit at the beginning of Alice in Wonderland, isn't she?
Yes.
And like that's what the whole mushroom thing is about in Super Mario Brothers.
Oh no. We found the secret.
so Lewis Carroll wrote about Alice in Wonderland is basically a Mario 64 guidebook.
Yeah. Miyamoto made a better Alice in Wonderland game than American McGee.
Ooh.